Growing up in Hamburg. After the war, a new life slowly began in Hamburg. Amid the ruins of destroyed houses, a new generation grew up, and I was one of them. At that time, we lived in Bethesda-Straße, in a neighborhood that was already being rebuilt, although many ruins still stood all around us. Some houses had only their outer facades, which remains. Behind them lay rubble, broken walls, and open basements. For us children, this was no longer a world of terror. For us, it was an adventure playground. We met there almost every day. We built little huts out of cardboard, wooden planks, and anything we could find. Between the old walls, our own little world emerged. We often spent hours working on our shelters, improving them, or trying to make them weatherproof. Sometimes we even believed our tiny houses had become truly waterproof. When the rain came, we crawled inside and proudly waited out the bad weather. But the heavier the rain became, the more our construction slowly turned back into cardboard and mud. Eventually, the roof above our head nearly dissolved, and we had to escape, laughing and completely soaked. But that was exactly what belonged to our childhood.
Born among the ruins, that's where we belonged. We were chasing freedom, singing our own songs. We never cared for tomorrow, we were happy just to be. And the grown-ups kept on watching, even when we stole gently apples from the old tree while the summer drifted by. Those were days that felt like dreaming underneath the open sky.
When we were not playing in the ruins, we often went to the football field about 15 minutes away, or we met at the parish hall of the Protestant church. There was a tennis table there, and the church community gave us boys and girls remarkable freedom. There was hardly any supervision, no constant pressure, and no endless control. We were simply together. Often there were 15 or 20 young people spending their afternoons there. We played, laughed, discussed things, and slowly discovered our own little world. The church excursions were especially wonderful. For very little money, we could join small camping trips somewhere out on the Hesslands. For us, that was a great adventure. In the evenings, we sat around campfires in front of the tents. Some played guitar, sometimes even the diacon himself. He knew how to create a warm and friendly atmosphere in which we felt comfortable. The fire crackled, the conversations became quieter, and above us stretched the sky of those long summer evenings. Perhaps we did not yet realize that we were the first generation after the war, but we could feel that life was slowly returning, and right in the middle of it, we were growing up.
together we keep singing, friendship growing everywhere. Far away we hear the sheep bells, resting quiet on the heath. Simple lives beneath the evening, nature breathing underneath. Potatoes on the wooden fire finally are roasted through, and the children love to eat the things they made together too. So another day is fading, like the glowing evening sun, but the memories will stay with us long after day is done.
One day, great excitement entered our home. I was going to have a sister. For me, that was a small miracle. I waited eagerly for the day my mother would return from the hospital with a baby. And indeed, a tiny screaming bundle was brought home. A little bed now stood on the other side of my room. My sister arrived, but almost at the same time, I learned for the first time that joy and sorrow can sometimes exist side by side, because actually I had been given another sister as well, Birgit. I had waited for her too, but after only a few weeks, the news came that she has not survived. She has died. I had never truly seen her, and yet I felt a deep sadness. Something inside me already knew, even as a child, that a human life had been lost. At that time, I still believed strongly in God, in angels, and in another world beyond our own. I often thought about that time unknown being and quietly hoped she might continue somewhere in peace. I could not yet understand death, but I felt that something was missing. Life went on. My sister Angelica grew up quickly. From her little crib, she often looked over at me, shook the bars, and wanted attention. Soon we played together, and the older she became, the closer we grew. She often clung to me like a little burr.
Forces of love now gather near, bring her peace and hold her dear. Let her rest in gentle light, wrapped in childhood pure and bright. Softly echoes through the skies, a melody that never dies. Like distant bells it starts to ring, a tender song the children sing. And all around her through the years, love will calm her silent fears. Hand in hand their voices
Although sibling naturally arched from time to time, we were always very close. Eventually, our family moved to another district of the city. There we moved into a small terraced house, which for us was great, a great step forward. For the first time, we felt that we have truly arrived somewhere. But the next surprise soon followed. One day, my mother happily announced that my parents were going to build a small weekend house in Zirksdorf on the Baltic Sea. For us children, that was almost like a dream. We often traveled there and watched the little house being built. Later, once everything was finished, Zirksdorf became a permanent part of our lives. We spent almost very second weekends there, and of course, all our holidays as well. The house was small, but to us it meant freedom. In this single large room stood two beds for my parents and a bunk bed for my sister and me, almost like little bunks on a ship. The terrace was especially beautiful. The house had been built offset from each other, creating small protected courtyards between them. In one corner stood a fireplace where we often sat together in the evenings, lit fires or grilled food. We sat there during the long Baltic summer events, listening to the wind and enjoying something that had become precious after the difficult rebuilding years, a feeling of security.
Blowing softly everywhere, throwing sand against your skin. Tiny grains that tickle in. A little house beside the sea. A dream for you, a dream for me. You walk the shoreline in the sun. Your skin turns brown while days are fun. The children now become great builders, little castles made by dreamers, and in the water old and young splash together in the sun. Waves are dancing on the shore. Laughter echoes more and more in this place beside the sea. You can feel at home and free.
As time passed, my life slowly began to change. Childhood, with its ruins, games, and endless summer days, gradually started to fade behind me. At that time, I attended elementary school and reached the eighth grade. My grades were actually quite good, many B's, some A's, and a few C's. My teacher repeatedly urged me to continue into the ninth grade, but I had had enough of school. I wanted to go out into life. I wanted to do something practical, work, learn something tangible that one could hold in his hand. My mother eventually accepted this, but she said very clearly, standing around somewhere without skills is out of the question. Then you must learn a trade. And so I began searching for an apprenticeship. Eventually, I found a training position in Hamburg Poppenbüttel with the company Netele and Hinz. There I began my apprenticeship first as a precision mechanic. The first months were an entirely new world for me. The training workshop smelled of iron, oil, and machinery. Everywhere there were wheels, workbenches, and lathes. For hours we filed pieces of metal into shape, learning precision and patience. In those days, one started completely from the bottom. First, you had to understand the material before you were even allowed to work on real machines. Later, I changed within the metalworking profession and became a sheet metal worker. At that time, this was something unusual because I was among the first apprentices allowed to retrain within the apprenticeship without losing time. 2 years in precision mechanic and then another year as a sheet metal worker. That was how my apprenticeship was structured. Looking back, it was a good time. I learned not only a profession, but also discipline, precision, and responsibility. For some time, I was loaned to the company Paul Karg. There I learned about the construction of large industrial coffee machines. These were not small household appliances, but huge systems for Latin America, in which coffee beans were sorted, peeled, and roasted. We manufactured large metal components, exhaust units, housings, and many technical parts later installed in these machines. I learned an incredible amount there as well. Then finally came the big day of the examination. I produced my journeyman piece, passed the theoretical examinations, and successfully completed my training. Shortly afterward, we young skilled workers were invited to Hamburg City Hall. There, in a ceremonial setting, we received our skilled workers' certificates. I still remember the atmosphere of that old, dignified hall with its dark wooden paneling. One of the high representatives of the City Hall of Hamburg gave a speech about how important skilled trades were for society. He said that people who could create things and work with their hands formed the foundation of a functioning country. At that time, I perhaps did not understand every word of his speech, but I felt only one thing clearly. Now, a new chapter of my life was beginning.
When the birds begin their flying, leaving nests behind at last. So it is with growing children, wanting freedom from the past.
Now the music's getting louder, not so cloudy.
place called home. Music pounding through the evenings, so loud it shakes the air. Many older people wonder what is happening out there. Boys all try to impress the girls now. Each one wants to be the king, and sometimes their foolish actions leave them lonely in the end.
Still, it is a special season, full of dreams and full of fire. Slowly now they learn to follow their own road and own desire.
And although the years are changing and their childhood disappears, they are getting ready for life now, stepping forward without fear. And with all their new opinions, they don't want to stand alone. So they gather into groups now, searching for a place called home. Music pounding through the evenings, so loud it shakes the air. Many older people wonder what is happening out there.
After my apprenticeship, I was taken on permanently by Nederland Hinds. We manufactured medical equipment, spectrometer systems, flame photometers, and other technical devices that at the time were highly modern. Gradually, one learned more and more, not only the work itself, but also an understanding of how such devices were created in the first place. We manufactured individual parts, built complicated housings, and step by step learned all the craftsmanship required in production. This included soldering, milling, turning, and many other techniques. Although my main focus was sheet metal work, in a smaller productive facility, one did almost everything. I liked this work very much. I still remember the lunch break especially well. We sat together outside, talked, and had food brought to us. Our favorite meal was fresh North Sea shrimps with mayonnaise on a real Hamburg bread roll. We sat there, ate, and talked about life. Many colleagues had hobbies. Some worked on their motorcycle during lunch break, others quietly rode a lap around the yard. NSU machines, Zündab, and Kreidler mopeds rattled around everywhere, the typical sound of this year. But eventually, we asked ourselves the same question more and more often. Was this really all there was going to be. One of my colleagues, now your card, one day told us about a lecture at the South African embassy. They were looking for young skilled workers and encouraging people to emigrate to South Africa. They promised apartments, loans, and good opportunities for the future. Naturally, we went there, and the more we heard, the greater our enthusiasm became. To us young people, it sounded like a gateway into a new world. My friend was already 25 years old and free to decide for himself. I, however, was only 17, perhaps just 18. In those days, legal adulthood began at 21. I needed my mother's permission. For many evenings, we discussed it together, but she did not want me to move to South Africa. At first, I was disappointed. In my mind, I had almost already packed my suitcases. Then I remembered that some of my ancestors had been captains, men who had traveled the world by ship. And suddenly another thought came to me. If I was not allowed to emigrate, why not go to sea instead? When I asked my mother whether she had anything against a life at sea, she could hardly object. After all, it was a proper profession, and traveling simply belonged to it.
Longing is a restless feeling, calling you to distant shores. And aboard the ship you're leaving for the world beyond the doors. Far away where freedom's calling, across the endless open sea. On the ocean you feel freedom, and now I'm part of destiny. Adventure now is standing near me. I can feel the salty breeze, and the old world still ring true now, carried softly by the seas. Take me far into the distance, that's the place I long to be. Though this life is new before me, from today I sail the sea.
So, in the end, I signed on with Hamburg Süd. My first ship was the MS Erika, a cargo ship of about 8,000 cross register tons. I served as an engineering assistant in the engine room. Then came the day we sailed out. At first, everything was full of excitement and adventure, until I realized that my body had entirely different plans. After only a few days, I became terrible, terribly seasick. For 2 weeks, I practically walked around the ship with a bucket hanging around my neck because I was constantly vomiting. The older sailor advised me to keep eating small pieces of bread so that my stomach would not become completely empty. And indeed, after about 2 weeks, the sickness suddenly disappeared. After that, I was never seasick again. Now the beautiful part of the voyage began. We sailed into the Mediterranean Sea. There I saw for the first time the incredible color of the water, encountered dolphins, sea turtles, and many other animals. Once we even caught a shark, which a Japanese ship later exchanged for a large tuna, much to the delight of our cook. Later, we passed through the Bosporus into the Black Sea. But there, the sea suddenly showed its other side. We were caught in a severe storm with force 12 winds and force 12 seas. At times, our ship plunged so deeply into the waves that it felt almost like a submarine. The situation became so dangerous that all men who were not on direct duty had to remain above, near the command station. We stood there in life jackets and waited. But at the same time, I had a strange experience. While the ship fought against the violence of the sea, there I experienced real fear of death for the first time. A human being can even grow accustomed to fear. After some time, the panic slowly disappeared and gave way to a strange calmness. Perhaps it was indifference, perhaps exhaustion, or simply the knowledge that one could no longer control anything anyway. Even the simplest things suddenly became difficult. You could not simply walk through the ship anymore. Stairways sometimes turned almost into vertical shafts because of the ship's angle. One had to wait until the ship swung back again before it was possible to continue. But eventually the storm weakened, and finally we arrived off Odessa in the Black Sea. Then we finally reached Odessa. Even entering the harbor felt special. Everywhere there were cranes, warehouses, and ships from many different countries. After the difficult days at sea, the harbor seemed almost peaceful. Slowly, our steamer docked. Thick ropes were thrown ashore and secured. The gangway was attached, and all of us breathed a sign of relief. But hardly had the ship been moored when an entirely different world began. Soldiers marched along the quay. They set up a table and immediately established a checkpoint. Some of them came directly aboard. One after another, we sailors had to enter a small room, present our papers, and explain who we were and what function we had on the ship. For us, this was unusual at first. You immediately noticed different rules applied here. After all the controls were finished, my friend Dimitrios and I decided to finally go into the city. We were especially interested in a famous duty free store we had heard about. There, they said, one could buy real Russian caviar directly from sturgeon and many other things, hardly available in the West.
Odessa and wild and free. Southern winds can touch your heart now. Kindness there feels natural somehow. Golden sunlight warms the facades, shining bright on ancient stone. Every street still tells old stories, yet the city feels like home. Elegant old villas glowing like forgotten royal dreams. Wide green avenues are flowing softly through the golden beams. Harbor sounds and distant ship horns blend with waves along the shore. Salt and seaweed fill the evening, calling sailors evermore. In the cafes people linger, no one seems to rush away. Life moves slower here in Odessa, like a warm and timeless day. And the nights beside the harbor carry music through the air. Old romances, fading laughter, living softly everywhere. Odessa city by the Black Sea, there the restless soul can rest, far away from noise and hurry. Here the heart still feels its best.
So we dressed properly and walked down the gangway. But even below, we were immediately checked and registered again. It was carefully noted that we had left the ship. Then we had to pass through a large harbor building and several dark rooms, one after another. At the time, I joked to my friend, who knows how many times we've just been X-rayed. At the end, another man sat behind a desk, checked our papers, and finally waved us through in a friendly manner. And then we actually stood outside in Odessa. The city seemed lively and somehow foreign. At the same time, old vehicles drove everywhere. People hurried through the streets, and over everything hung that unmistakable atmosphere of the Eastern Bloc, which until then we had known only from stories. We looked for the tram line that would take us to the duty free store. Eventually, we found the right tram and climbed aboard. Shortly afterwards, the conductress came over to us. She was young, pretty, and friendly. We opened our wallet and held out a few dollar bills so she could give us change. She looked at the money, smiled, and shook her head. She said she could not exchange dollars, and apparently we had no rubles either. Then she says and laughed kindly and said, just write for free. Some things were really that simple. As the tram rattled through Odessa, we curiously looked out of the windows. Everywhere there were old buildings, broad streets, and those strangely rugged Soviet vehicles that looked as if they would last forever. Eventually, we got off near the duty free shop. There, one could indeed pay only in dollar. Rubles were not accepted. Inside, there were many things I can hardly remember today, but I remember the caviar very clearly and the vodka. I bought two twins of genuine caviar and a bottle of amber colored vodka I had never seen before. My friend Demetrius was more generous. He bought 6 or 7 tins of caviar and 2 bottles of vodka as well. Afterwards, we wandered through the city for a while until we finally decided to take a taxi back. The old Soviet vehicle rattled and clattered over a very bump in the road. On the roof, written in Cyrillic letters, was the word Moskva. The engine sounded as those loose screws were flying around inside. At times, we seriously wondered whether we would reach the harbor at all. But despite all the noise, the car bravely held together and actually brought us back to the ship. Took several weeks. On board, we finally tasted the caviar. With a little lemon, it truly tasted excellent. Demetrius also drank one of his vodka bottles empty during the voyage. Then we finally reached Hamburg again. As always, we first had to pass through customs in the free port. The customs officer looked into my bag, discovered 1 tin of caviar and 1 bottle of vodka, smiled briefly and said, "That's fine." Then we waved then he waved me through. My friend Demetrius tried to walk directly behind me as inconspicuously as possible, but in his case the customs officer looked more carefully. They found several tins of caviar. That is subject to customs duty, they immediately said. Demetrius became angry. He loudly complained that the caviar had cost only a few dollars in Odessa, and that we was not expected to pay high custom fees. Finally, he shouted angrily, "Then I'll just throw the tins into the Elbe River." But the customs officer remained completely calm and answered dryly, "You can do that, but you will still pay the customs duty." That ended the discussion. Demetrius went home, and I also returned to Hamburg. This time, however, no longer as the boy once has been without money, because by then I had earned money and fulfilled a long cherished dream. I bought my first car now, a used dark blue Volkswagen convertible. When I finally pulled up in front of our terraced house and stepped out, my parents were visibly relieved that I had returned safely, and I too was happy to be home again, at least for a while.